Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Patti Brennan Show. Whether you have $20 or $20 million, this show is for those of you who want to protect, grow, and use your assets to live your very best lives. Guys, I am so excited to have our guest today. Dr. Brian McDonough has his own YouTube channel. He does amazing long-form podcasts on topics that are just far-reaching, from leadership to financial stuff and also medicine. We were having a conversation, Brian, about the Pope. And we were talking about the fact that you're working part-time. And folks, I asked Brian, I said, what's it like for you? He was working like 3 jobs always at one time. And everybody, he's the go-to person. He is the voice of Philadelphia when it comes to medicine. He was on KYW, radio, the whole bit. And he's beginning to kind of transition. You're working at St. Francis Hospital, right? And tell folks what you're doing there.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm still doing KYW and 1010 Wins in New York, the broadcasting.
Amazing.
Public speaking, I still do that. The medicine, I've always been teaching in a residency program. So the way it works, I'm a family doc. So the way it works is you essentially see everybody, inpatient, outpatient, it's everything. So for most of my career, it's, every 4th weekend on call, if not more, or every 4th night on call, seeing the inpatients, being in the outpatient. Then as I got into administrative work, moved up the ladder, you're a lot of people probably know you're on these Teams calls and you're on meetings and you're this and that, and did all that, did my time, and actually was ready to just kick back. Tried that for a while, and I think my wife pretty much sent me back to work. But also, I've had an opportunity, which I love, to basically teach the residents, and I'm with them 3 days a week, and it could be like a 10, 12-hour day, 3 days. It's really intense. They bring their toughest cases to me, and I'm seeing different patients. But I'm also able to read and focus only on medicine and only outpatient medicine. So what I found, Patti, is that doing that, I feel more on top of things than ever before. And as you know, working in radio and in television, you got to be on top of it. But even to the point where you're addressing the latest recommendations. So when you mentioned the Pope, at this point of the time we're taping, the Pope is obviously very ill. But the Vatican gives you a little bit of information here and there, but you can put the pieces together without speculating. But what is very interesting about it is, in dealing with pneumonia and what's happening with the Pope, just from teaching so much, I kind of can predict his struggles, what's going on, without even knowing, because we're all the same. He's 88 years old, and we're going to fight things. So from a standpoint of a career, it's been a nice blend, and I don't know if everybody gets that, the opportunity to dial back from probably what would have been a 70-hour week and making it a 40-hour week. But for me, 40 is great. That's much less intense.
And how lucky are those residents to have you in their lives? I mean, I think it's so cool. It says so much about you, because what you said before we started to tape was that, in the beginning you were telling stories and you were doing that, and you realized that that wasn't connecting with the residents. So you began to ask them questions and challenge them to think for themselves, because eventually that's what they're going to have to do.
Oh, you're so right, because what it is, initially I thought, oh, well, I can talk about a case we had in 1997, and they're polite, but their eyes kind of glaze over. But when you give them something and say, okay, you told me this, what would happen if this happened, and you're giving information, then when a resident, somebody younger, comes to you for something about advice, they do it on their own time. Because let's face it, they're in there seeing patients, and they want to finish their day, and they don't want to hear a long-winded story. They want to get done. But when they have time is when they can approach you. And if all I have to do is teach them and worry about their patients, and I don't have my eyes on 20 other things, I can really engage them. And I think that's great. The other thing I think that we really need in healthcare more than a lot of fields is I try to say to them that, you have an opportunity. I'll give you an example. A patient was in last week without breaking any HIPAA rules. Patient had something very serious, and the resident picked it up. The resident had a tough morning. New resident, fallen behind, kind of had to say, you got to pick up the pace, was really upset about that. And then in the afternoon, in an exam, picked up something that was very important. The next day we found out it could be a life-saving pickup.
Wow.
So I was able to say to him, like, and a couple of the other residents, like, please understand, nothing I'm doing in my week is any more important than what just happened here. Nothing you do in your week's more important. And this is the gift you have as a doctor. You can literally save somebody's life. I don't care about the rest of your day. I don't care about what you build, what your schedule was. You save somebody's life. And that's the gift of this career. And I think they need to hear that more. They're not just going to work and grinding it out. They have an opportunity to help.
Boy, Brian, that is amazing that you were able to bring it home like that, because what I'm hearing from so many doctors and residents is, they're stuck with the computers. They're typing. They don't even get to look at the clients. They ask questions. They've got their back to the patient. It's just not what they signed up for. And for you to be able to catch somebody doing something right and remind them, this is why we went into this profession. That's a gift to them. You're a gift to them and I think about you, Brian, as you were talking, you have so much emotional intelligence. That's a gift in and of itself, because, you've got your family medicine, then you've got the surgeons who may not have that same bedside manner, may not be as patient with their residents, but that's how they're going to learn. And for you to recognize that, that's why St. Francis Hospital is so smart to keep you around.
And it's fun. We had a succession plan. So I used to be the chairman. We've got a chairman. So I can be there. I step back. I don't want to be making the decisions. But when something happens, you're kind of there to say, I would probably do this. Again, if you're asked.
Right.
And that's what it has to be. I think I had to learn, like all of us, you want to jump in. But you got to wait until you're asked. And it's the same thing dealing with your family.
Yes.
If your kids are married, like if they come to you, you want to say it. And it's really hard not to say, I wouldn't do this. And of course, you speak when something could be a terrible mistake.
Sure.
You'd be foolish not to. But all in all, let people kind of live and figure things out.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So, and I found it also mentoring my team, because I didn't really plan it this way, Brian, but what we have here is not only do we have the gender diversity and the racial diversity, we have generational diversity. So we've got me and a couple of people like me, but then I find myself mentoring, the 40-plus-year-olds, and they're mentoring the 30-year-olds, and then the 30-year-olds are mentoring the 20-year-olds. So we're backfilling for capacity, because I always want to make sure that we can continue to deliver the quality advice that we've been, delivering, and what our reputation is.
And Patti, I'm curious, do you find also that you're learning a lot from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, like things that maybe you missed and now you see
the
them?
reverse mentoring is crazy, especially with the technological advances and the software solutions that we've got available to us now. And they're the ones that are finding this, especially when it comes to the estate planning, the wills and trusts, trying to interpret all of that and put it in words that clients can really understand. That's really important, because the minute they leave the law firm's office, they forget what they agreed to. And that's really important. Really, really important.
No, and the world's changed. You have to learn. Like, for instance, I was planning a couple trips, and what used to be so easy, now you're online and you're adding this and you're adding that, and you find that you're like spending hours filling out forms just to go away and get flights and things. It's really changed from what the world we had.
100%. It's funny, because I have this for you. I'm going to give this to you before you leave. We just recently lost my sister-in-law, and it was so interesting, and I'm not proud to say this, but my own brother, right? I was having this conversation with him, and I said, so tell me what you guys have. What have you done? Does she have accounts in her name? By the way, where are those accounts? Do you have the usernames and passwords? Oh, yeah. I've got it right here on a card. And again, same thing, HIPAA. But, it was really interesting to really bubble up some of the issues that he hadn't even thought about. So we have this thing, Get Your Affairs in Order. It's 4 pages of stuff that people who read it say, gosh, I never would have thought of this. Like, the usernames and passwords, of course, with most of these financial institutions, you have to change them every 6 weeks. So have you kept them updated somewhere? The cell phones, the social media, have you appointed somebody that could take over your social media? What about all the pictures on your iPhone? Where do they go? So these are things. What about your pets? Have you made provisions for your pets if you have pets at home? So it's really interesting how some of the things that we kind of take for granted, people don't know to do. It's interesting because I think you know this. My son had a traumatic brain injury, and how many parents don't realize that when their kids turn age 18, they're adults, and so mom and dad have no rights anymore. So if the kids go into the hospital, you're subject to HIPAA, right? You can't give mom and dad any information. Mom and dad cannot authorize brain surgery, for example, or get into the financial accounts and figure out, the kids have rent. How are they paying the rent? And unfortunately, the kids' FICO scores are going to go way down because their bills aren't getting paid because they don't have a power of attorney. So those are the little tidbits that I think are so important that you provide, that I provide in shows like this.
But it's interesting, just what you brought up. I had an opportunity to read your book, which I'd recommend to people do it. But when I read it, a lot of these things came up, and I thought, I haven't thought about that. And I said, well, why would I think about that? I'm thinking of things as a doctor. It's tough enough to keep the health stuff right, and you have to learn to trust others or learn from others.
Yes.
And it's funny you make that point. My wife and I joke about it, but we call it like a death file, that in a safe deposit box, you have your listing of accounts and where money is. And it's something simple, and actually I have a funny death file. I say, if you're reading this is not good news.
Right, exactly. I love that.
But it's kind of like, but you have to, things people don't want to think about. And I think that's very true from a health standpoint.
Yes.
Like one of the things that in talking with you is you can have all your affairs in order financially, but if you don't take care of your health, if something happens to your health, it means nothing because you can't share it. And I think part of that is, enjoying the youth of what you call your senior years, making sure that you do those trips, that you have things prepared, that you plan. It's so good for your overall health while you have it.
It's good for your physical health and your psychological health. I guess you and I are kind of blessed with the fact that we do this all day long. I never realized how important my nursing background would be, because I don't have a problem having conversations and really kind of playing that, role of, okay, let's pretend that I'm sitting at this conference table with one of you. What do you see? What would you like to see happening? What do we need to think about with that? Where would you live? What would you want to have happen? So let's kind of go through and have that fire drill, that lifeboat drill. And people are kind of surprised, like, wow, we don't want to think about that. We don't want to talk about that. Better to talk about it now. Are you guys, while you're both healthy, are you doing the things that you want to be doing? I tell people all the time, and Brian, this is for you and Diane as well. Hey guys, it's freshman year in college, right? Go nuts. You've got the time, you've got your health, you can walk, you can do these things. Have fun with it, because there may be a season of life when you can't do those things. And, especially if there's one of you, you're not going to want to go. You're not going to have anybody to go with. So enjoy your money, enjoy your time together while you still have it.
No, you make a great point. I think couples have to have that conversation because there could be resentment as well. If one person wanted to go away and the other person denies it or just doesn't do it, and then something happens to either of them from the health, but especially if it was the person who didn't want to do it, the person taking care of them is like, now I never got away and I'm taking care of you. There'd be a lot of resentment there. So if you talk about things and have that conversation, what do you want to do? Well, it could be travel, it could be sports, it could be, going to theater, whatever it is, but take advantage of that. I think it's so important.
This is really interesting. We're having this conversation because I'm going to come clean with you. My husband and I talk about this stuff from time to time, and I am nuts, right? I'm really busy, and I love doing this. This isn't work to me. And he is in a different season of his career, of his life, and he's weaning down, pretty much not working that much. And I always go home and he's emptying the dishwasher, doing the laundry. I'm like, Ed, I feel so bad. He said, don't feel bad. Enjoy it. You're on your game. You are at the top of your game. Don't worry about me. I'm doing this stuff because you used to do this stuff while I was working too. This is my way of giving back and thanking you for all those years that you did this stuff.
That's great. And you're figuring it out.
We are
you're talking and I think, for me, I don't know necessarily, when people say, will you retire? Well, I don't see myself ever really retiring because I like to write and speak and the broadcasting and I like patients. But there'll come a point where maybe I say, well, the patient care, it might not be my time. it's time to give it to someone else and to create things. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to figure out what it is you want. And for other people, I know lots of doctors who have said, I'm just done, and they're totally doing other things and they're happy. I think what you need to do, and we all evolve here, is what is your plan though? What are you retiring to? What are you moving forward to? Because that's not just...
That's exactly right, Brian. And I'm so glad you said that, because so often, we find people who literally will walk down my hallway and they're like, Patti, please. And they're practically crawling, Brian. Like, please, can we retire? I want to retire. Can we retire? And then I start asking questions. Tell me about what it is that's going on with work. I got this boss, they're so demanding, I've got this commute, I don't want to be commuting back and forth. They're making us go back to work, yada, yada, yada. So I try to reframe it, right? So if I hear you right, you have this new boss and you've got a commute. So you are retiring from a commute. Do I have that right? So when you do that, what are you retiring to? What are you going to do with all this extra time? And then they look at me like, well, I didn't really think about that. And then we have that conversation and say, the worst thing that I find is that when people do stop working, they're bored to tears and they find themselves very lonely. And as you well know, because you know better than anybody, loneliness is a pandemic in and of itself. And that is really, really hard. It's very, very bad for the person's health.
We saw a lot of that during COVID with young people in particular who were working remotely.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought of that.
They're working remotely and they were used to, so all the interactions, it's nice. You could stay in your pajamas and work and put a nice shirt on. There was a lot of nice pluses, but they're in the same room, in the same house, and they're not meeting other people. And as a result, we're starting to get, anxiety was up, depression was up.
Wow.
Because people, we're social creatures.
Yes.
And you get that. So it's really interesting that people in their 20s and 30s and 40s were experiencing the same thing as somebody in their 60s or 70s who retired. It was the same phenomenon. It was the cutting out, your work-related friends. Because when you retire, people want to talk to you, but they're busy. So if your friends are from work, they're largely, what you share is work. If you're no longer working, you may share some things, but what else do you have? Like, what hobbies did you pick up? What are you doing? And where are you going?
That is so insightful of you, because I was thinking about the young people and what they were missing out in terms of their professional development, not being around other people, seeing how other people work, and it was impacting their career trajectory. And you're absolutely right. They were by themselves. We often blame social media, right, for that FOMO and, that anxiety and depression and feeling like everybody else is moving forward except me. But just being by themselves, alone, and not having that immediate feedback. That's the advantage of having more than one child, I think, is when you've got an older brother or sister to say, cut it out. You're being a jerk when, they develop issues with friends and that sort. So here's a question for you. Tell me about your show. Tell me about what's your goal right now in this season of your life?
So what it started out as was my son is really good at this stuff. He has a State of Soccer TV podcast, which he is in the sports world. It's jobs in the sports world, and it's a lot of metrics and data and all sorts of crazy stuff that he loves. But he basically got started with a podcast because he had interest in soccer. So when COVID began, I was frustrated because I felt there was a lot of misinformation. And even when there was information, it wasn't necessarily explained properly. So I started a podcast. It was called A Doctor in the Pandemic, or the Dr. Brian McDonough channel. And all I did was I told everybody, you're going to get a daily COVID report from me. And I was doing it for KW and 1010, but you're going to get daily information from me. But here's the deal. I'm not accepting sponsors. No one owns me, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. I have nothing to gain out of this, and I would constantly say that. I don't care. I'm not running for Congress. I'm not doing this. And I would always try to be very fair and upfront. So I basically did about 450 reports on COVID, built quite a following, because what I was saying is and in fact, my wife was saying it was like COVID Central. She said, because you got to figure what I was doing. I was all day long, I was in the hospital when nobody's going out, and I'm driving to work, sleeping in the basement, dressing in the garage, wondering, my age, am I going to even make it through the week because there was no vaccine?
Yeah.
Then I'm coming home and I'm doing COVID stories, and I'm seeing firsthand people who don't believe it, people who are denying it, all that stuff. And I would just answer questions, and I would just stay focused and say, I understand but early on I started saying things like, look, there's no absolutes. Everything the government's saying, it's partly true, but they don't know. I don't know. None of us know. This is a virus and it's going to change. Yeah. So when the vaccine came out, I said, I find it highly unlikely vaccine would work. We'd have to get the entire world vaccinated to eliminate it. So people are still going to get COVID. So when they say you're not going to get COVID if you have the vaccine, doesn't make sense. You're going to get COVID, but you won't get it as bad. It's like the flu shot. So early on, I was saying COVID vaccine will eventually be like a flu shot. You're going to get it every year or twice a year.
Yeah.
And high-risk people will get it more than those.
Wow.
And that's what we see play out. But I just played with the science and told people, or they're going back to college, what are your fears? So it started out as that. Well, at a certain point, you talk about PTSD, you got to move on.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't keep talking about COVID. There's more to life than COVID.
Sure.
So what I did was I did it about face. I started just interviewing interesting people, and I realized I can interview anybody I wanted. So I'm watching a documentary on TV, and I'm watching a documentary about Russia in the 1920s and leaders, and I'm looking at this, and they interview somebody, and I go, oh, this guy, Dr. Richard Overy, is in the UK. I wonder if he's still in the UK. And I look him up. Oh, and I say, hey, you want to be on my podcast? And all of a sudden, I do a whole story about Russia in the 20s.
Oh, that's so
And I have the leading world expert. And I said, I can get anybody I want. And then I started, I loved Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
And Johnny Carson always used to talk about the bombastic Bushkin, which was his lawyer.
Right.
And I went back and found out, I said, I wonder if he's alive. Sure enough, he's alive. But not only was he alive, he's like 90, but he hates Johnny Carson. They had a falling out, and he wrote a book talking about Johnny Carson's life behind the scenes.
Oh, my goodness.
And I interviewed him about Carson. He goes, why do you want to interview me? I said, well, see my other stuff. I just like to interview and learn.
Interesting people.
It's got like 3.1 million views. It's ridiculous. But it's all because, like, you get these people who haven't talked in a long time, and I'm having fun.
Yeah.
So what I've done as time going on is anybody who wants to kind of come on, we chat.
Yeah.
And then I just do basic health segments if I think it's important that are short form. Because the way the internet, what I've learned from my son is, you can have your long form like YouTube and Apple Podcasts, but the stuff that hits Instagram and the other things have to be like 30 seconds.
Right. So
I do like a health tip. So I'll say, just be aware of this. So I did something about explaining why anxiety is increased by people if they drink too much the night before, what hormones are affected. And so I'm explaining to young people, if you're really anxious the day after you drink, here's why.
Oh, cool.
And I explain what happened with brain chemicals. And then I say, so this is a reason why you need to cut back, because this anxiety is only getting worse because these chemicals start to, and then it got all these people on Instagram are just sharing it.
Oh, that's so
because you're using a tool that they're using to reach a group you could never reach. So it's a two-pronged thing, but I still don't accept advertising. I'm still doing it on my own.
I don't either.
Yeah,
same thing.
It's for fun.
We're just doing this for fun.
Right.
We're interviewing great people. I want no conflicts of interest. That is my middle name.
Yeah.
And you know what? I don't know about you, Brian, but I find that, when we do podcasts on subjects, it's basically on stuff that we want to learn about. So, it's the old Walt Whitman thing. If you want to learn about something, write a book about it, right?
When people come up and they say to me, I'd be honored to interview you, and it's just the Dr. Brian McDonough channel. It's people that on the YouTube, it has a certain number, but where it really picks up and you're not aware is the audio version. Like people in their car, they hear.
Right.
So they're the ones who.
Do you know how many people are listening on that?
You can, there's metrics. My son teaches me how to do that.
See, I don't know how
he'll tell me
that.
some stuff and go like, oh, you're not doing well with this. Oh my God, that one blew up. Because there's companies that do that. He knows how to do that. And they're evergreen. And that's the beauty of it. Like the Carson thing, I interviewed the guy like 2 years ago. It's still out there. And it just lives.
Nice? Yes.
But you have to remember everything lives. So be careful about what you say, because you can't really bury it.
Exactly. It gets out there. So that is so interesting. So when you think about topics, and how do you come up with the topics and the ideas? I mean, I just, knowing you as I do, you're such a curious person, and I think that's what's so intriguing, because you're naturally curious. So you figure, you know what, maybe I can interview this person, or maybe people would be interested in knowing why anxiety is really, increasing in young people.
Right. And there's a lot of people I've reached out to who don't get back.
Right.
Like there was somebody I saw, I don't know what show they were on, but as a 4-year-old, they were in Mensa and they came on TV. And now they're like a 45-year-old professor.
Interesting.
And so I said, you were on, and I tracked them down in another country and said, you were on this show. Would you want to do a thing? And they never got back. So I just try to get stuff. But if it's cool when you've got something like you can show a clip from decades ago and then bring that person, because you always wonder what happens to people.
Yes.
Like, who.
Well, you know what, Brian? I would say not everybody wonders what happens to people. You wonder what happened to people. Because, again, getting back to that emotional intelligence, you're very curious. You're interested in other people genuinely. Like, I remember when you and I first talked and connected, you really, really wanted to understand how I went from nursing to becoming a CEO of a financial plan. And I felt that from you. It was legit. And I think that's great because you're translating that to your patients, to your residents, and everything that you do. And everybody that's lucky enough to be able to listen to KYW and to your podcast.
Well, it swings back to what we were talking about, which, it kind of comes back to even somebody who's thinking of retiring. Like, think of what you've done or I've done in my life. You have multiple interests in your career. That means you might say, I'm done with being an accountant. I'm done with being a lawyer, but maybe I want to work in a home and garden store.
Right.
Maybe I've never done that. This is the time to do that. Like I was talking to my wife, I said, one of the things I definitely want to do at some point, I'm a Phillies fan.
Yeah.
I would love to just be a ticket taker in Clearwater and bring people to their seats. I just think that would be so much fun, just chatting with people. And and you don't know, and those jobs are tough to get, by the way.
They are tough.
But do that. I seriously thought about, and my wife was laughing. I said, no, I'm serious. I was thinking at one point, I think it'd be fun to be at Costco and just, greeting people. Like things like that are for the energy and the meeting people is important. And I think everybody should look at what they want to do and write a book. I mean, whatever it is.
I'm reminded of a story about my own father. My dad worked for IBM. He was a really smart guy, went to Wharton, the whole bit, worked at IBM his entire life. And when it came time for him to retire, he got really bored. So he was really handy with his hands. So my husband had his own business. He was in the office furniture business. And sure enough, my husband needed some help because when he went into a large company like a DuPont or an IBM or somebody, he needed to have somebody to supervise the installation of the furniture. Well, my father was in sales. So one thing led to another, and the two of them had a conversation. And, my husband said, my dad, as you probably know, my sister was in the Olympics. My dad was a diver. And he wanted to be able to follow her, to the different diving meets and make sure that he could follow her. And so basically when he retired and they had the conversation, he just wanted a brainless job. He just wanted to work with his hands. So Ed offered him the job. He would show up at these, big companies. He'd be the ambassador for the company. He would supervise the people installing the furniture. He'd get in there on the floor with the screwdriver and his drill and help the guys. Loved it, every minute of it. And he didn't feel any pressure. He was just grateful to be able to go somewhere. And he felt like he was making a difference. And he did. In fact, I will tell you, it's never been the same since my dad has passed. So to your point, it's really trying to discover what it is that you really like to spend time doing. It could be gardening. It could be reading. It could be just hanging out. You don't know until you're in it often, and that's okay.
Right.
The first stage of retirement is the period of ambiguity. How's this really going to work? And that's when anxiety tends to be very high. So, you and I get to talk to these people and say, you know what? We've worked with people for decades. We've helped over 1,000 people retire, stay retired, and go through the 4 seasons of retirement. It's been studied. It's been quantified. And it really tends to be the same for a lot of people. The first stage is that period of ambiguity. Once the honey-do list is completed, what are we going to do today, honey? And honey is saying, listen, I got lots of stuff to do. I'm going to have lunch with my girlfriend. I'm going to do my thing. Have fun. And that's when anxiety, depression really set in. And so let's understand that in advance and have plan B. What are you going to do with your time? What are your interests? Do you want to do bird watching? Do you want to volunteer somewhere? It's not just for old people, as my husband says. It's for everybody. And it's that social interaction. I think we all want to feel like we are making a difference in another person's life. You and I get to do it even with these podcasts. Even I'm shocked at how many people listen to my podcast, watch this podcast. It's amazing to me. And it's really nice to know that it's making a difference.
Well, and even for your own children, if you can handle this stage, and it shows them that there's something for them too down the road, because they'll reflect on that.
Yes.
They'll say, gee, mom and dad did this or whatever. And we're very honest and open with our kids. Like we'll say, I don't know, I got to come up with something else to do. And they'll say, well, why don't you try this? I don't know. And you work on it as a team. And you look at things and you do it as a family and also with your friends. So you do
it with your kids also, huh?
Oh, I'll talk to them and say, now that I have more time, what else can we do? So, I might, we're talking to my daughter about pulling my grandson out of school, like daycare one day. He's like 3, just take him somewhere. Sure. But just you can do things like that. Again, that's what we're talking about from health, taking care of your body. Because if you don't, you got to watch your heart. You got to make sure, you're eating properly. You got to make sure, you resist temptation. What's very easy when you're dialing back a bit is you can eat really well and you can eat out often. But what do you do to try to minimize that? How do you make something social that's healthy for you? And it's tough.
What I've learned about with that is the environmental eating that could be a killer. If the goodies are out, easy to get to, I'm eating them. But to your point, the working out, the doing the exercise, that's something that you almost have to plan, right? For me, I do it first thing in the morning before I come into the office, and then I know it's done. I've done something for my body.
Right.
But not everybody has that luxury. They don't have that flexibility.
Yeah, they've got to figure out something it's part of their daily life. And, from a medical standpoint, study after study after study shows if you do 150 minutes in a week of exercise, that's important. And the big thing I tell people as they get older, and I think it's maybe the most important message I give, it's strength, balance, and flexibility you have to work on.
Okay.
Think about it. What takes out a lot of people in their 70s and 80s in particular? Broken hips, falls, issues. So how do you avoid that? You've got to keep your muscles strong. So maybe you got to do some sort of weightlifting twice a week. And that doesn't have to be expensive. It could be push-ups, sit-ups, getting up and down from a chair, strengthening your legs like that. Or it could be more intense. But you work on your strength, flexibility, stretching, and obviously balance is key. Get up on one leg and try to see what you can do it. And one of the things, for instance, I'm looking into, my wife was laughing at me, I'm looking into yoga.
Yeah.
But I was at the Y, and they had this thing. It was basically paddleboard yoga where you stand on a board. And my wife goes, honey, why don't you just try to do yoga without standing on a board in water? And I went, yeah, I guess I'm kind of being an overachiever here because it probably would be a disaster.
Right.
But, so you've got to pick something that's realistic. Like you want to succeed.
Right.
So maybe you don't do whatever they call that hot yoga where you're, you're push. Just do a regular form and see if you like it. But then that's your flexibility and strength.
Right, right. It's so interesting because there's even these little tests that you hear about, right? Stand up on one leg and put one leg up and see if you can stand on one leg with one leg up for 30 seconds. I found I couldn't do it.
It's really hard.
I was wobbly.
Yeah, you do.
It was crazy.
And you think you can do it, but you haven't pushed it. Or with grandchildren, getting down on the floor.
Right.
Getting up, getting down, getting up, getting down. And I think what you do that's really important, and I try to do as well, is I think people have to understand nobody's an expert. We're all struggling through stuff. Like, it's not like I hang out with doctors all the time. Yeah. Like, we do a lot of things that are probably not as healthy as we tell our patients to do.
100%.
And people have to understand they're not imperfect. They're not doing things. It's a struggle, and you've got to keep working on it. Yeah. I think it's an effort as you get older. So part of what you want to do is make yourself healthy as part of the time you spend whatever you're doing.
100%. You know, I often tell people, you know, my job is not to should on you. And I tell clients, I say, please don't let anybody should on you. Here's some ideas. You could try them. You could choose not to. Totally up to you. This is what I found has worked for me, or it hasn't worked for me. I do the balance test with them all the time. I said, let's try to do it together, and then I wobble right in front of them to show them that these things are easy to avoid. Let's just try it. You know, this is the year of try. Let's try this stuff. And that's when we discover that, you know, maybe it's just a simple thing of just trying it once a day, and long, you know, before you know it, you're good at it and you're standing up for a minute, right? On the one leg. And that will pay dividends in your 70s and your 80s to be able to do that.
Absolutely. You keep working on it and keeping yourself strong. And obviously, there's other things you have to worry about. For instance, if your blood sugar is elevated or whatever, make sure you get it controlled, because that starts to work on your body and can work on the nerves and different parts of your body. Make sure that if, you know, cardiovascularly, you make sure that your cholesterol and triglycerides and things are good and your blood pressure is fine. Make sure that, you know, we think about how we take our cars in and we're so religious about changing the oil and doing all these things. But how many times, even your dog and cats you're taking, but when's the last time you actually were checked out, and what have you given as far as your time? Or your significant other, like, are you, the person you're living with, is that person taking care of themselves? And make sure you're watching out for that too.
You know, Brian, I don't know the answer to this, but I had heard recently that you can actually go to some of these labs, you know, like a LabCorp, somebody like that, and just order your own labs. You don't necessarily need a doctor's order.
So much more with the internet is becoming easier to do.
Okay.
You can. There's a lot of different things that we used to not be able to do because it wasn't accessible to us. And now you can, and you can check. And one of the other things you can do, if you have a healthcare provider, a doctor or another, they also now have the portals where you can write in and say, I'm really curious about this. You know, I want to set up an appointment, but can you order this? Your doctor is going to want to know those things anyway.
Right.
And they can just file it in, and then it's more likely to be covered by insurance too if you do it that way.
That's a great tip.
Which it'll help. And if you can't get medicine now, there's places you can go to. Walmart, you can go to other places. You know, as you know, I deal with a very challenged economically group of patients, and what I saw with COVID was where those pre-existing conditions and other issues took out a lot of those people. They were some of the ones that were dying because their bodies weren't what they should be because of the other struggles in life. Well, though, you can make sure that people get their medicines a lot cheaper. There's ways to get these things done, and I think that's important. You know, do your own searches, but take advantage of somebody who's taking care of you.
So what I worry about with that kind of stuff is if you're not going to a Walmart or a nationally recognized company, but just ordering something online, you don't know where it's coming from. It could be filled with fentanyl or something like that.
I just did a story for KYW where we were talking about liver damage. And I was talking about the obvious stuff, like if you're overweight, you can have fatty liver. And then I was talking about alcohol. And then I was talking about, and I won't get into them all, but the herbs that you take over the counter, they're not regulated.
Right.
And so, first of all, they may not necessarily be as pure as they say, or the concentration they say. But more importantly, there's certain things that will just attack your liver. So people, like, there's some things that are very popular, and they would take it, and it can be impacted. They don't even know. And their doctor may not even know because, frankly, we weren't taught a lot about that in medical school. The only reason I know is because I'm always reading studies because of the role I have. But most people, if they're out in practice, they don't necessarily know the latest herbs. You know, does this extract do this or that? And that's important.
So when you think about, let's say that you've got somebody who's getting an annual physical. Would a regular family doctor, I'm just kind of curious, would they normally order the typical liver
what they'll do, what we're doing now, we used to be, if you remember, we would say, like, these are your annual labs.
Right, exactly.
Now we have labs focused on what the person is bringing up. So to answer your question, we would get basic liver studies, especially if somebody gives you a hint. Well, let's say I ask somebody, how much you drink, and
everybody lies about the drinking, right?
There's a joke that you double what they say, but the reality is, if they say they're drinking, you say, listen, let me just get some baseline labs. Then you at least have a sense. Or if they point to a part of their body that's bothering them or whatever, you get it around this. So now it's more of it's a calculated thing. So there's certain things you're obviously going to get. We have bundles of tests,
right?
But
the chem test,
right, those things. But a lot of times now we're looking more at people thyroid, other issues that might be bothering people, and the more we know, we're figuring that out, and then you can kind of see over time. Blood sugar. It's so easy now. The hemoglobin A1C is kind of it's basically a snapshot of a whole period of time, as opposed to like the blood, which is that morning, because everybody could just make sure their sugar is fine for that morning. They just have a good week,
right?
But the hemoglobin A1C will be 3 months. So,
and I would imagine, because the meds that they're on. So if they're on statins, that they're wicked on the liver. So that would be that.
You got to watch that. You got to check and you make sure things are there, and the pros and the cons. Yeah.
Is there anything in particular that you're finding very challenging now with medicine?
I think the challenge, and I see it with my residents, is there is a demand now to see more and more people in less time. Yeah, and what you're finding is more and more centers are now being run by businesses. Medicine has become a big business, and what might have been a doctor's office 35 years ago, where it was a doctor and maybe their spouse or the nurse, or there were two people, and their only expenses were really that. You're now bolstering 8 or 9 people by the patients you see. There's all the paperwork, there's the clerks, there's the legal department. So if you work in a healthcare system, for instance, there's so darn many administrators, and there's only a few people actually seeing the patients, and everything's got to be covered. And I was heavily part of my training, and what I did was I was very interested in it. I was good at kind of like doing order sets and anticipating how you would treat different. So I was kind of voluntold to help out with the different computer systems, Cerner and Epic. So I got heavily involved in them, in the building of them. And not that you wouldn't want me to change the ink in a computer, but I do understand how these things work. And what I've learned is that when they sold these products to hospitals and medical groups, they sold it to the CEOs. These machines are really good at billing and capturing charges and coding and doing everything the insurance companies and the billers want. They're not as good at patient care because they weren't being sold to the doctors and nurses and caregivers. They were being sold to the people who wanted to say, what money are we going to get out of this investment? And a lot of organizations bought the product. And
they're stuck with it now.
Well, when they have it, and now they can optimize, they can make it much better, as they use the term optimization. But they don't have the money for optimization. So they got the original tool they bought, which is a great billing tool, but it's not as good at patient care. So what you have with physicians, which is a battle with them now, is they call it pajama time. They go home and they're spending 3 and 4 hours on their own time writing notes. And seeing as many patients as they can, and the numbers keep getting ratcheted up. Now there is AI and things coming in, but the AI, you got to make sure is accurate, because it's still learning. So there's a lot of problems with the technology that have made, and the industry that medicine is. I think we kind of got to revamp it. And that's why I tell the doctors, like, stay happy and realize what you can do. You have the best job of anybody. Nurses have the best job of anybody. But the problem is, even nurses will tell you they're on the floors and they're more interested in putting everything into the chart. They can't spend their time with their patient, and they're
Brian,
frustrated.
I got to tell you, when I was a nurse on the floor and in the unit, one of the things I did every single night with my patients is I gave them a back rub. Can you imagine going into a hospital today and a nurse giving you a back rub? That was standard. That was mandatory. I, to this day, give the best back rubs of anybody I know. I learned it as a nurse.
My wife's a nurse. Same thing. That was a lot of nursing was really nursing. The traditional hands-on. And the thing that I used to love, inpatient, which has kind of gone away with all the technology, was a nurse would write a nurse's note, and I would see a note from 4 in the morning which said that the person wasn't able to have bowel movements. And I said, wait, it's been 3 days. And I would read the note, or the family hasn't been in, there's no support. They were all in the note. Now you just get a lot of data, which are great metrics, but they don't tell me
The softer
what
things.
is going on in that patient's life? What are they doing, and where are they? That's important because when you and you, as you know, patients, the people they bond with have always been the nurses.
Yes.
Doctors come in for a few minutes, but the nurses provide the true care, and I've always said that they provide the best care. But that's being pulled away too. So we have to get technology controlled,
Right.
and do it. And I think people are working on
Yes.
it. I see positives.
I see it also. I think that they recognize it and they see the way it used to be and what is happening to the actual care of the people. You know, I'm so lucky in a way because I own this company and I get to do this the way I want to do it. Nobody's telling us what we have to do, how many clients we have to have, yada, yada. None of that. I would never tolerate it. We take care of people, not money. That's the way I
Such a great, and that's medicine. And I do talks on physician engagement. So I go to organizations, healthcare organizations, and talk to them. How can we keep our physicians?
Yeah.
And I say, physicians, honestly, most of them only care about two things. They want to make their patients better. That's why they went to all those years of school. They want to help people.
Yeah.
And two, they need a sense of independence. If you've done something and you have 10 years of training, you know, beyond college, and you've done all these things, it's very hard to listen to somebody telling you, I want you to do this, this, and this, because, you know, and I will tell you, if there's a breakdown, I've been in healthcare forever, I find that the disconnect is the doctors say the administrators don't know, and the administrators don't respect necessarily what the doctors think, and they never get together. And there's always that battle. And until you have the two sides talking and truly understanding each other's side and respecting each other, those organizations are the ones to succeed. So what you need is the surgeon needs to come in and totally trust and respect the COO or the CEO. And the CEO has to really respect, but in many cases they don't. They look at each other as opposition, and that doesn't work.
It's so interesting that you say that. As you know, I was on the board, on the main board for Chester County Hospital here locally, that has that has been purchased by Penn. I will never forget being in a board meeting with Mike Duncan as our CEO, and head of medicine speaks, and then the head of surgery speaks, and I'll never forget the physician who was the head of medicine spoke to the board, and he started to cry, because he was telling a story of one of his patients who had to make a choice between his medicine or food.
Wow.
And this doctor started to cry in front of all of us on the board. It was a moment I don't think any of us will ever forget. It's just so cool the way they run the board meetings, and the fact that in that hospital, I will tell you, being kind of on the outside looking in, they really walk that talk.
So it sounds like that's a place that's getting it right. And there are a lot of places getting it right. And that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So the more that happens,
the more people like you tell your story and say, this is the, in my industry, we talk about best practices. These are best practices. I get on these lists at Forbes, at Barron's, and they highlight key financials best practices. This is what we believe everybody should be doing.
Right.
And that's pretty cool. You have in your mind an ideal of best practices. And what I love about you is you're telling that story. You're giving ideas. You're sharing these ideas with administration as well as the physicians themselves, so that they can retain the hope that there is a solution, that they should stay with this and continue to plow forward, because change, it's not going to happen overnight, but change will occur.
I always remember what my dad told me. He was a businessman, and a really bright businessman. And I remember we were debating about something, and he said, I'm going to tell you something now, and I just want you to believe it. And I said, I've always remembered it. He goes, you're very bright. He goes, you're really great. You've always succeeded. You wouldn't be in med school. He goes, but you have to understand there are people just as bright as you and brighter. But not only that, there's people who might not be as bright as you, but they're doing something different than you, and they get better at it because they do it all the time. And if you're in the business world and somebody presents you with a business idea, do not think you are smarter than they are just because you're a doctor. Understand they're smart. Always think they're smarter than you, and always believe they know more than you, and you won't get hurt because they're going to play up to you and they're going to say, you're so smart, you're so great, and you will fall for it.
Wow.
Especially if it's an unethical person. He goes, so just as long as you go in with your eyes open and go and respect others, that has helped me in dealing with hospital administrators. Because what I have to realize is these people, obviously, you don't get to that level if you're not obviously skilled, and you probably aren't in healthcare if you have passion for people to begin with. That's why you chose that path. And as I've learned about healthcare, if you're a business person, it's not necessarily the best paying of the administrative jobs. So these people probably are very interested in helping.
Yes.
And if you can connect on that level, and if they can connect with the physicians, but it's the
Finding
egos,
that common ground.
and the anger. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Finding the common ground. And I think that is so wise. I often think that, in a way, the biggest advantage I have is that I didn't go to college for business, that I didn't have a finance background, because I know that there's so much that I don't know, Brian. There's just so much out there to know. And so I'm always out there trying to learn, trying to understand. And in a way, it's given me a real advantage because, as I say to all of my really smart people who work here, listen, guys, remember that you're talking to a former nurse. Now, I'm not a nurse anymore, but kind of give it to me in words that I can kind of reframe so that I can explain it in a way that people can actually understand. Because I find when people understand things, they have buy-in, and then they can act on it with confidence because they get it, right? And I think it's the same thing with medicine. I think that's why I know that that's why you're so effective, why you have become the voice of medicine in Philadelphia, in Delaware, et cetera.
Well, one of the reasons I think it's important is if you don't connect, then you didn't achieve your goal. Like if people don't understand what you said, like you could come in there and use
pontificate
and use the highest language and look like you're great.
Right.
But if the person leaves and doesn't know why they're taking their medicine or what it's for or why they don't need medicine, half my conversations are why people don't need an antibiotic, explaining to them it's a virus and this isn't going to help, and explaining to them that don't leave angry. I'm just telling you this is what you need to do. But it's a conversation.
Sure.
And if you don't have that conversation, I've always also said in healthcare, and you probably in your business as well, but I know people usually tell me what's wrong with them. I know what's wrong with them by what they've told me and not always the exam, because they come in and they pretty much say what they have.
Yeah.
They start, but if you listen to them, if you cut them off, you may never hear it. But
right.
And when you talk about the computers, I always remember a story. We were talking about this early on about the computers. I had a mother of three, and I was doing the physical on the three children. I was not paid the mother's doctor. And as I was doing the physicals, I just saw the mom was like so depressed looking. I just kept seeing it, and I finally stopped and said, "Are you all right?" And she wasn't. And we got her in, see, but the point was she was just totally depressed and overwhelmed.
Wow.
But when you're on a computer, you're like this. You may not notice mom, and that's something that scares me too. It's the interaction, the conversation, reading the room that tells it.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
Exactly. What you're saying, I forget what that saying is. It's just the nonverbals. I just think the nonverbals are so important because you can just pick up so much. It's just amazing. And again, not everybody has that skill. You and I kind of take it for granted. I always love it when people leave the office and they say, "Patti, I always feel so much better when we leave." It's because they feel heard. Mm-hmm. You do that, Brian.
Well, one of the questions I had for you was when people are in that retirement stage,
yes,
how do they get to move from a saver to a spender? Because they spent all their time building this so-called war chest, but they now have to transition to using it. Is that a hard thing to advise people about?
It is hard because everybody's different. So I start with asking a bunch of questions. Like, there's a number of different ways to set it up. We can do option one, which is, we'll set it up so that you get a monthly deposit or a biweekly deposit, just like it's a paycheck. And by the way, we'll withhold the taxes just like you did when you had a salary. Or Do you want us to kind of set up a pool of capital that you draw from whenever you want? You can give us a call and say, hey, can you direct deposit $25,000 into our checking account? That's an option too. So it's really understanding what works for each client, and I think people really appreciate that. And the beautiful thing about it, Brian, is we can change it. It's an easy thing to change. Let's try to work this way, and if it's not working for you, no big deal. We'll go plan B.
So a similarity kind of like with healthcare, that just like everybody's different, and their body's going to be different, probably their approach to
same thing,
finance.
Same thing. And that's why, it's funny because I often tell people, you're not a pie chart, right? We don't do this. We have so many clients, hundreds of clients. We don't have one portfolio that is the same as the next because everybody's situation is different. Some people want to stay here locally. Some people want to move closer to their kids. That's the stuff that will really determine what we do in the end, is what they want to do with their lives. So it's really exploring what's important to them, not just about their money, but day to day. Because, again, we've done this for over 30 years. So we kind of know some of the things that might happen in their life, and we get to encourage them. I tell people all the time, we're in the hope business. There's so much to look forward to, and there are some landmines out there as well. Let's make sure we understand where you could be vulnerable and make sure that we can transfer that risk ahead of time before it actually could happen.
Well, I know in your book you address this, but one of the things that was shocking that I saw on a YouTube video of all things was somebody saying that when you're 60 years old, you have 1,000 healthy active weeks. And if you start to think about that, like, what are you going to do with those? And that's if you're lucky. What are you going to do with those healthy active weeks? And what do you want them to be? Not to put pressure on yourself, but and then also, how do you give yourself the best chance of having 1,000, if not 1,500 healthy weeks?
Exactly.
Why cut yourself short?
And again, where you come in is it's not just 1,000 healthy, but quality of life. Again, the mobility, the strength, the balance, the eyesight, the everything, making sure that you feel confident in your ability to do the things that you want to do. Because it is, we started this, Brian, you and I, having a conversation about the similarities between healthcare and financial care. Because so much of what you do is what I do also. And, you can't have one without the other. It's really, they do go hand in hand.
That's why I was excited about doing this podcast, because I thought you don't see many people dealing with both. Like, you can certainly, for instance, YouTube or any of these podcasts, you could get hundreds of people giving you financial advice or medical advice, but rarely do they combine the two and say the value of both.
Right. And it's cookie cutter also. It's, generalized advice, generalized ideas, and it's so cookie cutter. And by the way, like medicine, it can be really dangerous if you start, going on Dr. Google for an answer to your healthcare issue.
Right.
Same thing with your money. Boy, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of lousy advice out there. So everybody is different. Everybody is unique. That's why we are so closely aligned.
Right. And they're very similar, too, in that if you got a certain amount of money and if you can make a mistake and blow it, you got health, you could not be doing the right thing and blow it. And you don't get a second shot at either, because you're probably not going to be making a lot of money in those years. And if your health is getting worse, it's hard to recover. It's very similar. You got to maximize the information you have, the decisions.
In the book, I tell a story about two gentlemen on a park bench. And the one guy says to the other guy, I got an 8% rate of return on my portfolio last year. And the other guy said, oh, that's nothing. I got 11. And what neither gentleman understands is that it doesn't really matter, because they're both going to be broke in about 3 years. So we have to be careful what we focus on and make sure it's the right thing to focus on.
Oh, you did a great job of explaining cash and how in time, inflation can destroy you, what you think you have.
Oh, yeah, that was
I thought
the
that
blood
was,
pressure, right? It's like hypertension. Or I think the analogy was inflation. How devastating inflation can be. It's like hypertension. You don't know you have it, but it can kill you over time. So there's so much, and that's why, again, the healthcare kind of helps, because a lot of people understand, because of people like you, that, I got to watch my blood pressure. I got to watch my blood sugar. Same thing. But they don't quite understand how that relates to their money. And they're trying to get these, quick ideas, and they're, reading this magazine or this one article. And, with decisions like Social Security. Now the thing is, everybody should wait until they're 70 to start collecting Social Security. Well, I'm here to tell you, not always. Sometimes it's better for someone to take Social Security at full retirement age. Just take it, right? Because we don't know how long we're going to live. And by the way, you've got to make up that cash flow from somewhere. And if most of your money is in your 401k, you're probably going to want to take your Social Security and not take it out of the 401k yet. Run the numbers. It's different for everybody. So, the cookie cutter stuff is just, that's where I think when, our brains, we want to make things easy, right? We want to have the quick answer. But, it's not always the right answer. In fact, it could be financially devastating.
Right. So if you were going to give somebody, if I was giving somebody advice, a 60-year-old watching this, or a 40-year-old thinking about their parent watching it, I would say, the balance, the strength, the flexibility are key.
Yes.
I would say that you probably want to reduce the vices, whatever they are in your life. You know what they are.
Yep.
And then if you can, work on your personal relationships and not stress. Understand that you're not perfect.
Yes.
What would you say from a financial standpoint? What would you say that people should do?
Boy, there's different seasons of life. I say the 50s, the 40s, depending on how old the kids are. That's the most expensive period in a person's life. There's not a lot of money left over. So a lot of people don't have a lot of savings, by the time they get to be 50. And all of a sudden they turn around and they say, oh my goodness, I've got 10 years to do this. My suggestion would be for young people who are even watching and listening. First, when you're in your 20s, before you get married, before you have the kids, 10% into the 401k is my line in the sand. Save the money before you buy the house, before you do all those things, because there could be periods of years when you can't save that money. And the sooner it gets invested, the better. For other people, and again, in the book, I break it up into decades. In the 30s, these are the things to consider. In your 40s, these are the things to consider. Because people tend to want to kind of look at how old they are and what should I be thinking about. And you know what? There's no one way, right way for everybody. My suggestion is, and people don't want to hear the word budget. It's kind of like the word diet. It basically sends the message that you have to give something up. And I don't really want to send that message to anybody. Let's define, how you want to spend your money, even while you're working. Instead of wondering where it all went, tell it where you want it to go. Just keep track. And that, I find, begins the process of, wow, you know what? I had no idea I spent this much money at Amazon. Maybe I don't want to do that anymore. The clickbait stuff is really addicting, and that's where people get into trouble. So be aware, increase your awareness. Take a look at what you spent at Amazon last year. You can look at your previous orders. So again, it's understanding where the money is going and what you want in your life. Some people really get a lot out of that retail therapy. As long as I can keep on spending what I'm spending, I'll continue to work till I'm 70.
Well, it's probably out of print now, but there was a book I read when I was probably like 30 years old called The Millionaire Next Door. And it was fascinating. And I read it. It was great because you're always looking at, don't fall into the trap of looking at other people and saying they're doing this. And I think it's on steroids now because people look at Facebook and first of all, young people see the best picture everybody has of themselves. So they think they look terrible because nobody puts a bad picture of themselves on.
Right.
They also, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s see everybody traveling and it's always a picture at some beach resort. And they're like, what have we done? We've done nothing. So it's so much hard. It used to be somebody had a nice car. You saw them driving through the neighborhood. You would be jealous of their car or maybe their house or whatever. But you didn't see a lot of people. Now it's everybody. And I think that is also a source of anxiety and stress for people. And it might go against their ability to save because they just want to keep getting more.
I worry about that generation a lot because they are doing things that you and I never did. They are going on the vacations. They are buying these McMansions. They are doing that. And they're not thinking about, gee, the kids are going to be growing up. We got to pay for college. And by the way, we got to start thinking about our own retirement, our own health care, et cetera. They're not doing the things that we did because, you know what? We worried about it. We thought about it. The other thing that they don't have, that they don't realize, is they may have a parent who had a pension plan. They're not going to have pension plans.
Mm-hmm.
That is, a regular pension plan basically has a couple $1 million allocated to that person for the rest of their life. So the kids that are in their 20s and their 30s and even their 40s, they're not going to have that. They've got to make up for that themselves. So it's a reality check. And I'm afraid that they're going to get to their 60s and they're going to realize, oh my goodness, I'm never going to be able to retire. And that is really difficult. To your point, you don't want to give advice when it's not asked for, but you can kind of see the writing on the wall. That's really hard for me to kind of keep my mouth shut.
That's a great point you make too, that, we're talking about the struggles of retiring, but there's so many people, and the numbers better than I, but I think a significant percentage of people have less than $100,000 saved, if they even have that. And then they got the rest of their life. It's how do you retire? You get Social Security, but that's only enough to get the basics. It's hard to,
And even that's in jeopardy, right?
Right.
Now, a lot of people who, interestingly, people who are older, they're the ones that are worried about their Social Security. And I get to say, you know what? Based on all of the proposals that we've seen, people who are in their 60s and 70s, and you don't have to worry about your Social Security. It's the kids that have to worry about it because, based on the way it is now, it's going to be very different for them. They're not going to get what we're getting or what we're projected to get.
And to your point, no pensions, no Social Security.
Oh, yeah.
And if you haven't done it yourself, where's it coming from? There's nothing.
Right, exactly.
And that would be also very, very difficult.
And so those kids who are buying those McMansions, who have seen the value of real estate go up and up, they're going to realize that when they get to be in their 60s, everybody else is selling their house because they have to, because that's the only source of capital for their retirement. And they're not going to have that liquidity event because the value of the housing is going to go way down.
Because there'll be so many of them. Yeah.
Right. It's really interesting to try and anticipate. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. You and I get to have these conversations, Brian, and I'm going to end it here. Thank you so much for joining me today because, again, we think so much alike. I want to talk to you after the cameras turn off. And we need to really think about what kind of advice do we give to people, whether it's their health? You've got those, the strength, the balance, all of that. But are there ideas that you have to help people get there sooner than just telling them what's important? So that's what I think about. What can I do for these people? We give the, yes, fund the IRAs, and yes, that, you've read the book, in the second section, all the tactics and the ideas that people can do on their own. But, it's like I tell people, there's a process that you have to start with. And in the introduction, you saw, I kind of tease people and I say, you're based on the way the book is organized, you've got the introduction, and then the first section is the process. The second section are the tactics. These are the ideas. Do this, don't do that. And then the third section is, what are the 15 mistakes people make over and over and over again? And the conclusion ties it up into a nice, neat little bow. And I wrote in the introduction, I said, chances are you're going to want to go to section 2 with the ideas and maybe section 3 to find out the mistakes. Because, I'm like you, I want the answers right away too. And as I said in the book, and you can appreciate this, in medicine, prescription before diagnosis is considered malpractice. The same applies to your money. So start in the beginning with a process. You start with a history and physical. That is so important, and the same thing goes with finances. A history and a physical. So Brian McDonough, thank you so much for joining me today. And thanks to all of you who are watching and listening. I don't know about you. I thought this conversation was fascinating. Had no idea. I sat down with you, Brian, and said, so what do you want to talk about today? And you said, we'll just talk and we'll just see where it goes. And here it is, I don't know how many minutes later. And thank you so much for joining us.
That was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it. And I hope you got something out of it if you've enjoyed this. So thank you.
I'm going to work on my balance, Brian. That's something that I really need help with. So.
And I'll work on getting more of what's the time value of money, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Tell everybody get it in early.
Get it in early,
Exactly.
Absolutely. And your grandkids, too. The best gift that you can give to another human being is get them started early at a young age. Do Roth versus regular at a young age. I'll end with that.
It's great advice.
Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thanks.
Take care. I hope you all have a great day.